Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the second in a series of 5 programs, 5 lectures on the subject of violence in the human experience. My name is Tom Morgan, and I'm delighted you're here. I'm delighted you're interested in this topic. You wouldn't be here, I suspect, or most of you wouldn't be here anyway, if you weren't interested in this topic. Maybe a couple of students were forced to come, but I'd like to think most people are interested, and we'll continue this conversation that we started last month on the subject of violence in the human condition. This lecture, like all of them, is sponsored by the Alworth Center for the Study of Peace and Justice here at the College of St. Scholastica, and funded in part by the Warner Lecture Series of the Manitou Fund, the DeWitt and Carolyn Van Ivre Foundation, and by Mary C. Van Ivre in memory of William Van Ivre, a former trustee of the college. Additional support has been received from Reader Weekly of Duluth and from numerous other private donors. Thank you all very much. Your donations and your support year by year, I think, make this series better and better every year, at least from my point of view, so I'm very grateful. If you're new here or want to be a part of these lectures and hear more about them, we have a sign-up sheet in the lobby and on one of the tables. I think it's over in that direction. So please sign up, give us your name, and print clearly, and we'll keep you on the mailing. We'll put you on the mailing list, and you'll hear about other programs in the months ahead. After this lecture, of course, we'll have Q&A, and our speaker will stay for a while and talk with you and maybe sell a few books in the lobby. But I hope you hang on to what he's got to say to you and think about it. And sometimes these ideas take a while to percolate. And so we'll be meeting again on Monday here at the College of St. Scholastica it's all here. I hope you all got the flyer saying where we're going to meet and when we're going to meet. And we'll meet kind of under the supervision or direction of Gerald Hinkle Johnson, a colleague of mine here at the college. His resume is in this flyer. He knows something about this topic. And by the way, he'll also be joined by another colleague of mine, David Swenson, who's a licensed forensic psychologist. He's also on the staff here at the college. So they will facilitate a conversation with all of us on Monday night here at St. Scholastica. One other housekeeping matter after the lecture. Of course, we'll have questions and answers. That's sometimes the most interesting part. We have 2 microphones here, and the people can come up and ask their questions. Please use the microphones, because then everybody can hear and we don't have to repeat the questions. One rule, some of you have been coming here all the time, and I think this rule works very nicely, is that the students go first. So the students go to the head of the line, and they can ask their questions first, and then if we have time, of course, other members of the community are welcome to ask also. So please defer to the students. Our speaker this evening is noted for his research on the neurobiological and biosocial causes of antisocial and violent behavior in children and adults. He received a bachelor's degree in experimental psychology from Oxford University in 1977, and he received his doctorate in psychology from York University some 5 years later. He spent 4 years in 2 high-security prisons in England, working as a prison psychologist. In 1986, he headed the Mauritius Child Health Project, an ambitious longitudinal study of child mental health following a large group of people from that island nation off the southeastern coast of Africa. He moved to the United States in 1987 to take a job at the University of Southern California, where he eventually was given the endowed chair of Robert G. Wright, Professor of Psychology. 8 years ago, he made another move to serve as Richard Perry University Professor of Criminology and Psychiatry at the University of Pennsylvania. He also is the university's 4th Penn Integrates Knowledge professor. His main research interest is in neurocriminology, a new subdiscipline of criminology which applies neuroscience techniques to probe the causes and cures for crime. He and his associates also are working on biological interventions for antisocial behavior, such as nutritional supplements. His neuroscience research program encompasses adults, adolescents, and children, males and females. Professor Raine's honors include the Young Scientist of the Year Award from the British Psychological Society, a Research Scientist Development Award from the National Institute of Mental Health, an Independent Science Award from the National Institute of Health, the Joseph Zubin Memorial Award, and USC's Associates Award for Creativity in Research. His books include The Anatomy of Violence, which will be on sale here, and most recently, Psychopathy, an introduction to biological findings and their implications with Andrea Glenn. Professor Raine lives in Philadelphia with John Hung, his wife, who is an associate professor of nursing at the university, and their 2 sons, Andrew and Philip. They're both age 13. And when Professor Raine isn't thinking about crime and antisocial behavior, he enjoys watching movies, reading about film, and having lots of fun with his 2 sons. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Adrian Raine.
Thank you very much, Tom. Thank you. Thank you very much, Tom, for that very warm and gracious introduction, and thanks to everyone and all the organizations who have made this talk series possible. Not just this talk, but lots of other talks. I wish I could be here at St. Scholastica to be listening to the amazing talks and speakers that I see you have coming. And it really is a very special evening for me this evening because I was brought up as a Roman Catholic, and I understand that the roots of this college is Roman Catholic, and it's November the 5th. Now, for you, you don't think anything of November the 5th, but if you're a little kid growing up in England as I was, there's 3 things that you really look forward to in the year. Number 1, it's got to be Christmas. Number 2, it's your birthday. But number 3, it's November the 5th, because that's Guy Fawkes night. Now, if you're not familiar with Guy Fawkes, he was a Roman Catholic who tried to blow up the Houses of Parliament because he didn't like the Protestant king that we had. And every year, what we do, kids go around with an effigy of Guy Fawkes asking a penny for the guy. We want money to buy fireworks because in the evening, we build a bonfire and we burn an effigy of Guy Fawkes, who was ultimately caught, and he was hung, drawn, and quartered. I hope you're not going to burn my effigy after this talk that you hear, or have me hung, drawn, and quartered before I leave, because this research topic is a little bit controversial, the biological roots of crime, but I hope some good will come from the research I've been doing for the past 38 years. What I'll do this evening is talk about 3 things. First, those early biological roots. I'll talk about early health factors that raises the odds of crime and violence in some of us. Secondly, I'll turn to brain mechanisms which, when dysfunctional, may also give rise to violence and crime. And then thirdly, I'm going to look at the legal implications for the work that I and other researchers have been doing on the biology of crime. Specifically, we'll look at prevention implications, as Tom has alluded to. Secondly, we'll look at prediction. Can biological factors be used to better predict who will be a violent offender? And lastly, I'll turn to the question of punishment and legal implications of this growing body of research. Let me start first with early health risk factors. Risk factors so early that they come even before the child is born. So one of those health risk factors is nutrition, prenatal nutrition. I think you all know this country from this picture. The tulips, the windmills, got to be Amsterdam. And it was the setting of an incredible study done by Richard Neugebauer. A little bit of history here. It was at the end of World War II. Germany was retreating from the Netherlands, and there was a food blockade on the country, so that people were on near starvation diets there. You can see some of the kids at that time in the Netherlands. They have thin arms, thin legs. They had minimal nutrition during that time. But more importantly, some mothers were pregnant at that point in time and experienced poor nutrition when they were pregnant. Richard Neugebauer, followed up the offspring of these mothers. Some of the mothers had the poor nutrition, others had the normal nutrition. And Neugebauer found that if a mum was pregnant and she had poor nutrition, then her offspring are 2.5 times more likely to develop criminal offending, antisocial personality disorder later in life. And that's controlling for lots and lots of other background factors. Very big study. Over 100,000 individuals were assessed here. So that's one early factor, poor nutrition during pregnancy. That can raise the odds of future crime nearly threefold. What else? Well, mums who smoke during pregnancy. Smoking is a toxin that can negatively affect the brain. And of course, by the way, poor nutrition, we think, gives rise to antisocial criminal behavior, because poor nutrition will result in poor brain development. And as you'll see a bit later, I'll talk about poor brain development as a risk factor for antisocial behavior. But lots of studies have shown that smoking during pregnancy also raises the odds of crime and violence. This is just one study here by Brennan from Emory University. On this axis, we have the percent of the offspring of mothers who develop violent criminal offending in adulthood. On this axis here, we have the number of cigarettes the mum smokes a day. So some mums don't smoke any cigarettes a day, and this is the percentage rate of violent crime in their offspring. And clearly what you can see, the more cigarettes the mum smokes during pregnancy, the higher the rates of crime and violence in her offspring 34 years later. This is a very large study of over 4,000 births in Copenhagen, Denmark. And many other studies have replicated and extended that finding, controlling for other background factors like socioeconomic status and education. So yes, that's another factor early on in life that can raise the odds of crime and violence. And we know nicotine exposure is toxic to brain development in fetuses. There's carbon monoxide, a lack of oxygen to the fetus, and we know that that damages parts of the brain. The hippocampus is one brain area that's involved in the regulation of aggression from research in animals. So what else? What else early on in life can raise the odds of crime and violence? Well, taking alcohol during pregnancy. This is fetal alcohol syndrome. This baby has craniofacial abnormalities that mark out the fact that its mother took alcohol during pregnancy. It's got a smaller head circumference, low-seated ears. The nasal bridge here is underdeveloped. The philtrum is this part here, right there. There's a lack of development in these babies. They have thin upper lips. Streisgard, a researcher, put together 473 of these babies and followed them up into adolescence. And these are the rates of delinquency and police contacts and arrests in these babies. And you can see that the rates are high, 61%. So when the teenagers, a lot of them are falling into delinquency and get arrested and convicted. Now, there's probably quite a number of reasons why these babies are more likely to develop criminal offending. But one factor we believe is that alcohol is neurotoxic to the developing brain. So to illustrate that, this is the brain of a baby that died at 6 weeks of age for reasons other than fetal alcohol syndrome. And that's the brain of a baby who also died at 6 weeks of age, but due to fetal alcohol syndrome. So there you can see the ravages that alcohol does to the brain. And I'm soon going to move on to brain mechanisms which we believe predispose to later crime and violence. Let's take a look at this baby. Take a good look at this baby. Does it have fetal alcohol syndrome? Yes, it does, because now you know it's got craniofacial abnormalities that characterize fetal alcohol syndrome. Is this baby more likely, much, much more likely to grow up to become a violent criminal offender? Yes, it is. You've seen the data from Streisgard. Is this baby responsible for the fact that its mother took alcohol during pregnancy that raises substantially the odds of this boy becoming a criminal offender? No, it's not responsible for that. Will we hold this baby responsible for its crimes? Yes, we will. My question to you is that justice? Is that our concept of justice in our civilized society today? But if we don't blame the baby, who are we going to blame? And I think that question is beginning to come round in certainly Tennessee, which has enacted a new law. So to give you an illustration of this, this is Jamila Falls, who on July the 5th last year gave birth to a little girl. The problem was that the little girl was found to test positive for heroin and marijuana on the day that it was born. Tennessee enacted a new law that made this an offense for a mother to give birth to a baby addicted to drugs. So she was charged and convicted of assault, and she's, at this moment, still serving time in prison. So Tennessee is getting tough on pregnant mothers. But first of all, should the burden be on pregnant mothers for this? And the other question that we can ask ourselves, and I'd love to hear your thoughts during our interchange after this talk, do we go more for parental responsibility? Do we need to do more in society to guarantee a minimum level of parenting standards for the unborn child? Would we even go to demanding that to be a parent, you need first to be licensed to be a parent in order to ensure that children get a minimal standard of parenting that's at least as better as the love and care that we give to the average pet dog? Or do people need help and not handcuffs? Or do they need both? Is it that we need to help people more and also at the same time make people more responsible? Because we know that the negative effects of alcohol, drugs, are going to have knock-on effects to the offspring. Because free will is not as free as we'd like to think. The dice are loaded for some people early in life. And these are some of the early factors that can raise the odds of an individual beyond their control becoming a criminal offender. Now what I want to do is move on to brain mechanisms which, when dysfunctional, may give rise to antisocial behavior. A classic study or case in neurology was this man Phineas Gage, a railway worker, who at the age of 25 had a large metal rod blown through his skull. It was an accident, and it selectively damaged the prefrontal region of the brain, the frontal cortex, the very frontmost part of your brain. He survived the accident, but he was no longer Phineas Gage after that bar went through his head. He went from being a responsible railway worker, a foreman for the Great Western Railways, to being disinhibited, impulsive, gambling, losing all of his friends, losing his job, wandering around aimlessly, becoming what we now call today a psychopathic-like individual. It's only a case study, but it sets up an idea for us that perhaps this part of the brain is critically important for socialized behavior. And if it's disrupted or dysregulated in some way, that could result in more antisocial criminal behavior and even violence. So that's a hypothesis that we wanted to test in murderers, looking to see whether that frontal region of the brain is not functioning quite as well in severely antisocial and violent offenders. So what I'm about to show you is a study that I did in California. One of the reasons I left England to come and do research in California is that there's a lot more murderers in California to get together and brain scan, whereas in England we don't have quite so many, and you can't get them all together in one study. In California you do. There's a lot of homicide there. And what we were able to do is pool together 41 murderers and brain scan them in the same brain scanner and compare them to 41 individuals who were not violent offenders. I'll show you the key results here. You're looking down on the brain. Look on the left. This is a normal individual. You've got a bird's eye view. The warm colors, red and yellow, indicate high glucose metabolism. That's high brain functioning. This is the prefrontal cortex, the prefrontal region of the brain. And this is the occipital cortex, the visual cortex, which is well activated in the murderer, but you see a distinct lack of activity in the prefrontal cortex. So murderers, as a group, have poor frontal lobe functioning. Why should that predispose to antisocial and violent behavior? Well, this is a bacon slice view of the brain. You're cutting this way, so you head on to the individual and focus your attention on the underneath part of the prefrontal cortex. Another term for it is ventral prefrontal cortex. Remember the term orbitofrontal cortex. Orbitofrontal, sitting right above your eyes, lying behind your forehead. I'm coming back to that area at the end of the talk. What do we know about this brain area in normal individuals? Well, we know it's involved in making good decisions. We know it's involved in regulating our emotions. It's involved in controlling our impulses. It's involved in having insight into ourselves. And it's also involved in, learning from mistakes. Now, here's the thing. Criminal offenders are bad decision makers. They don't regulate their emotions very well. They don't have control over their impulses. They lack insight, especially psychopathic offenders. And they don't learn from mistakes. They keep on breaking the rules of society, going into prison, out of prison, into prison. Why? Because that part of the brain that's responsible for these positive processes is not functioning well in offenders. And it's not just in violent offenders. We find that antisocial individuals in society even have a structural impairment in this part of the brain. Antisocial offenders have an 11% reduction in the volume of gray matter, neurons, in this prefrontal cortex here. Now, word of warning here, and a caveat and some caution here. Not all murderers are the same. For example, one of our 41 murderers was a serial killer, Randy Kraft. And you can see his brain scan here alongside a normal brain individual and a one-off killer here. And you can see Randy's brain scan, even just visually, looks quite different. You see, his prefrontal cortex is actually functioning very well here. And, to me, it's the exception that proves the rule. Because Randy killed 64 people in a 12-year period in California, almost without being caught. Now, you've got to have something good going for you to be able to run around killing 63 people in 12 years without being detected whatsoever. And what Randy had good going for him was a very good frontal cortex, allowing him to plan, regulate, control, clean up the mess of the murderer, and going to work the next day as a computer consultant. So, an important caveat here. This prefrontal dysfunction doesn't apply to all violence. It's not applying to the planned, regulated, and controlled violence of serial killers. It's more characteristic, instead, of violent offenders who are impulsive and where emotions run out of control in the act of the homicide. So that's one word of caution here. Another word of caution is that we had another individual with a brain scan that looked quite like Randy Kraft's. Notice the good frontal functioning, good occipital functioning, the temporal cortex is well activated here, and in the very center, this is the thalamus, activated in both scans. You're not getting it in the other scans. What's interesting about this brain scan is that it's my brain scan. And the point to make from that is, no, you're not at risk tonight, you know, and come to me, I'll sign the book for you, you're okay. The point is, there are clearly normal people like myself with abnormal brain functioning. And conversely, there are abnormal people, people who are murderers with totally normal brain functioning. So there's no one-to-one connection here. You know, it's not destiny to become a violent offender if you have poor frontal lobe functioning. Nevertheless, we are beginning to gain some initial clues about what brain areas, when dysfunctional, can raise the odds of an individual becoming a violent offender. Now, we can't rely on one study, so what one of my graduate students did is put together the findings from 43 brain imaging studies on antisocial offenders. And she finds that there is a relationship. Antisocial individuals have structural and functional impairments in this prefrontal cortex. The strength of that relationship can be put into the context of an effect size. This is a bit technical. Cohen's effect size, 0.6. That tells you how strong the relationship is. It's of medium strength. And to give you a sense of this metric of 0.6 as the strength of the relationship, then here's some other examples. Aspirin. Some people, like myself, I've got a history of heart disease in my family, so I take a baby aspirin every day under the idea that that will reduce death from cardiovascular illness. The strength of that relationship is 0.04. I've talked about smoking, haven't I? Smoking is linked to lung cancer. How strong is that relationship? The effect size is 0.16. Now, undergraduates here will be familiar with SAT scores. We use that to select you. How well do they predict grade point average? The effect size is 0.4. To get to the strength of this relationship of 0.6, you need to take attention deficit disordered kids, you've got to give them an attention task, and show that they have poorer attention than normal individuals. That's when you get to an effect size of 0.6. What I'm saying here is that this relationship between poor frontal lobe functioning and antisocial behavior is not trivial. It's not everything. And I'm not talking tonight about social factors, which of course are important. Of course the social environment is important, but I want to look at the other side of the coin, biology, to say that there are other perspectives too that we have systematically ignored in these past decades, and we need to take more attention to them if we want to stop crime and violence in society. That's one brain area, the prefrontal cortex. The guardian angel on behavior, so to speak. The other brain area I want to talk about is called the amygdala. It's the, if you like, the emotion center of the brain. Some of you are nodding your heads here. You've heard about this. You've probably also heard about the term psychopathy or psychopaths. If you watch the movies, you may remember Silence of the Lambs, Hannibal Lecter, the archetypal psychopath who lacked conscience, lacked remorse, lacked guilt. He didn't have the feelings that we do. And we believe psychopaths have a fundamental impairment in lacking normal emotions. What's causing that? Well, you can say, what part of the brain is most involved in emotions? It's the amygdala. What we did is we brain scanned 27 psychopaths in society, compared them to 32 adults matched on background factors who are not psychopaths, and we found an 18% volume reduction in the size of the amygdala. So this is where the amygdala is. This is the side of the brain, the front and the back, so you're going through here. And this is a head-on cut here, showing you the amygdala, and the blue areas indicate deformations in specific areas of the amygdala in psychopathic individuals compared to normals. So the part of the brain that, if you like, generates a sense of fear and anxiety, as well as embarrassment and shame and guilt, that's structurally, physically impaired in these psychopathic offenders. Now you can ask the question, what's coming first? Does an amygdala impairment cause the blunted emotions and lack of conscience that we see in psychopaths, or is it the other way around? It's very hard to tell that. You would have to do brain imaging on young kids, follow them up over time, and which ones become criminal offenders. Nobody's done that. But what we did do on that island of Mauritius that Tom mentioned here, so yes, this is Mauritius. I've been working there for 28 years. I've been there 43 times. You can see what a terrible place it is to go to for your research. In that research, what we did is that we had 1,800 3-year-old children, and we measured fearfulness in these children by putting electrodes on their fingers to measure sweat rate. And without going too much into the details of the task, we're measuring how fearful they get just before something nasty happens over a pair of headphones. They hear a nasty sound. You can't give 3-year-olds electric shocks, unfortunately, to make them really scared, but you can, give this aversive, horrible tone. And we're looking at something called fear conditioning. If you've heard of classical conditioning, Pavlov's dogs, but take it as a measure of how fearful a little 3-year-old will get before a punishment comes on. That's what we're measuring in fear conditioning. We followed these 3-year-olds up for 20 years, and at age 23, we find out which ones become criminal offenders. 137 of the little tots became criminal offenders in adulthood. We matched them to 3-year-olds who do not become criminal. A 2-to-1 match. They're matched on gender, ethnicity, and 11 indicators of social adversity. Then we go back 20 years to when they were age 3. This is fear conditioning. In other words, if you have a high score here, you're anxious and fearful just before an impending punishment. If you're down here, you are fearless. You're lacking in fear. And what we find is that when we look back in time, the criminal group here, they have poor fear conditioning or a lack of anticipatory fear prior to a punishment. Whereas 3-year-old tots who grow up to become normal individuals show good fear conditioning, as they should, at age 3. We measured this fear conditioning because it's a proxy for amygdala functioning. All neuroscientists would say, where does fear conditioning come from? It comes from the amygdala. So this is our way of trying to document that the poor amygdala functioning is coming before the onset of antisocial criminal behavior. I mean, you can't document cause and effect exactly, but we can tease out the temporal ordering of the variables to try and suggest causality from a lack of fear, i.e. poor amygdala functioning, and later criminal behavior. But when we published those findings, it was my graduate student who was the first author here, the journal, American Journal of Psychiatry, ran an editorial on the article, meaning it's a criticism of the research, written by another scientist. What does that scientist say? Well, Born to be criminal? What do we make of these early biological risk factors for crime? Philippe Sturzer is the author, and he says, whoa, we have to be really careful here. You know, because we may stigmatize these little kids thinking that you're nodding your head, they're going to be criminal offenders of the future. And that would be wrong, wouldn't it? I mean, that would be wrong. But Sturzer also goes on to say, but biological research is giving us this great chance to understand, better understand, the causes of future crime. And Sturzer's last sentence says, so let's take this knowledge and use it to benefit those kids at greatest risk, and let us develop intervention and prevention programs to stop the rot early on in life. And my question for you is that going too far? Is that a bridge too far for us to go? To screen and intervene early on in life, even before the kid has done anything wrong? If you ever saw a movie called Minority Report, preemptive strike to stop crime before it starts, would we ever go in that direction in society? And if we did, would it be for the better, or ethically, would it be for the worse? That's one question I'd like to hear your perspective on in question time. I want to stay with the amygdala and talk about moral decision-making, because criminals are amoral, psychopaths lack a moral sense, we believe. What we are learning from lots of laboratories in different countries is that the amygdala is highly activated when we make moral decisions. We've learned that by putting people like you through a brain scanner, giving you a moral dilemma, and then monitoring your brain functioning to see what lights up. So imagine you're in the brain scanner. This is a moral dilemma that we would give to you. This runaway trolley is out of control, and it's going to kill 5 railway workers working ahead of it on the railway track. You're on the footbridge here looking down. Standing next to you is a large gentleman. The only way that you can save these 5 individuals is you push the big guy off the bridge. He plops down, but he stops the trolley, and you save 5 lives. In the scanner, you're asked, is it appropriate for you to push him off? You think of that now. Don't give your answer, but think of it. Are you going to let 5 innocent men die? 5 people you could have saved? Come on, it's 1 for 5. Utilitarian moral decision-making dictates you push him off. I mean, he's also a big guy, and he's not taking baby aspirin. He'll probably die early of heart disease anyway. Give his life some meaning. You know, 5 for 1, and, you know, something that he can be remembered for. But thou shalt not kill. Big sign in the front. Big sign in the front. So what do you do? I'm not interested so much in what you say you would do. I'm more interested in how you feel. How you feel. Because what we've learned, as I say, is that the emotional amygdala is highly active when we go through these dilemmas. And in brain imaging, we do find that the amygdala here is activated in normal people in going through these moral dilemmas. However, the red dot is an individual person. This is amygdala activation during the moral dilemmas, high, low. And this is their score on psychopathy, low, high. You've got about 17 individuals. It's a small sample. What it shows, though, is that the higher the psychopathy score, the lower the amygdala functioning. Basically, we find that in psychopaths, the amygdala is not lighting up when they are contemplating moral decisions. And to me, from a scientist's point of view, going to society, it raises a moral dilemma to me. We know that criminals know cognitively right from wrong. Of course they do. They know it's wrong to kill. It's wrong to rob. But Do they have the feeling, the emotional feeling for what is right and wrong? And, you know, if they don't have that feeling, can we blame them for what they do? Because, you know, they're not responsible for, you know, coming into the world with an amygdala that's, you know, 3 sizes too small, and them lacking feeling and lacking a heart for other people. So I think that's a moral dilemma for us, which I want to turn to really right at the end here. And in fact, we're coming and moving into the legal implications here. I want to start with the idea of treatment, because, you know, one of the themes of this speaker series is violence inevitable. I want to argue, no, it's not inevitable. It's part of the Peace and Justice series. I now want to turn to prevention. What can we do to change the brain for the better? Because that's the logic. Because I've been arguing bad brain, bad behavior. If that logic is true, what we should do to stop bad behavior is upregulate the brain. How do we do that? How do we do that in an appropriate, ethical way? Well, Marie Antoinette, I think, may have had part of the answer. You might remember the story, the revolting French peasants were baying for her blood, and she is reputed to have said, if they have no bread, let them eat cake. And so she was, I think, arguing for a nutritional intervention to stop these revolting peasants. And I think she was actually on the mark, because it's not just food for thought, it's increasingly becoming food for court. Magistrates are getting more interested in relations between diet and crime. As one example of this, this is data by Joe Hiblin here. He plotted homicide rates in 26 countries against fish consumption. So on this axis, homicide rates per 100,000, high and low. Seafood consumption, pounds per person per year, low to high. And there is a significant relationship. So, I mean, take Japan. They eat more than their whole body weight in fish every year. Low homicide rates. Eastern European countries here, Bulgaria, Hungary, Poland, low seafood consumption, high homicide rates. The United States are not on there, and when criminologists challenge me on that, they run around to try and find the data. In this year, where would the United States be? And they were right there, right on the line. We have low seafood, well, you probably don't have low seafood consumption in Duluth with that Lake Superior that you've got, but generally in the country, we have relatively low fish consumption, relatively higher homicide rates. I know what you're thinking. Correlation is not causation. That's what you're thinking, and you're absolutely right. You need to manipulate seafood consumption or omega-3 in some individuals and then see, does it change their behavior? So that's what we did in Mauritius. We took 200 of our normal kids in the community, and for 100 of them, we gave them an omega-3 drink every day, a drink containing 1 gram of omega-3. The other 100 children were randomized into a group where they got the fruit juice drink, but it did not contain omega-3. And we measured their antisocial behavior. This is the carton of fruit juice drink that they got. This is score on antisocial behavior. This is the start of the intervention. Both groups are the same. It's a randomized controlled trial. Both groups come down in the next 6 months, and they take the drink for 6 months. It's called a placebo effect. Kids in the treatment program tend to do better no matter what. It's a placebo effect. But they stop taking the drink here, and the controls, who only got the fruit juice without the omega-3, they go back to where they come from, whereas the omega-3 group continue to go down. It's a moderate effect size, but it's significant. Of course, that's not a solution to crime and violence, but could it be part of the equation that we might increasingly consider? Because omega-3 is critical for brain structure and brain function. Well, that's just one thing on maybe what we can do to change the brain. There's other things that we can do. We can talk about that in question time. The next issue is prediction. And again, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. Could we use biology, genetics in the future to better predict who amongst us will become violent in the future? We did this in a study where we took men in the community in Pittsburgh, young men, we brain scanned them and measured the size, the physical size of their amygdala. Because you've seen smaller amygdala, more psychopathic, more antisocial. We then followed them up for 3 to 4 years and found out which ones had been committing crimes after the brain scan. And this is what we found here. By the way, that's just where the amygdala is, quite deep inside the brain. Again, it's that emotional area of the brain. Let me describe this graph. We have the blue bars. These are individuals with low amygdala volume. This group are those with high amygdala volumes. So we're splitting the men into 2 equal groups. On this axis, we have the percent of violence after the brain scan. Key point here is that if you've got a low amygdala volume, 57% of those men commit a violent criminal act within the next 3 or 4 years after the brain scan. And that's 3 times more than the equivalent rate for those with normal or high amygdala volumes. And that's after you control for other risk factors for future crime, like aggression, violence, and psychopathy. Because, of course, the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. But brain imaging is giving us some added value in predicting who amongst us are at risk for future violence. So my question to you is, should we begin to use brain imaging and other biological risk factors for crime in order to make decisions about things that we have to make a decision about every day? Which offenders to release early from prison, compared to which offenders do we keep in prison because they're a danger to society? But would it stop there? If we went that direction, and if adding biology into social risk factors for crime helped us make better decisions on prisoners, would the next step to be applying those risk assessment tools to everyone here and locking up those individuals who have the biological and social risks for future crime, locking them up even before they've done anything wrong? The preemptive strike. Would that be, again, be a bridge too far in the future? Or do we need to do a better job than what we're doing now in predicting future violence and doing something about it? Lastly, I want to turn to punishment, because as you've been hearing, I think these biological risk factors and the notion that bad brain functioning could give rise to antisocial behavior raises questions about how we punish criminal offenders. I want to illustrate this with a case study. It's a case study. The man is called Michael. What you need to know about Michael is that he's 40 years old. He's in his second marriage. It's a stable marriage. He's happily married with a stepdaughter, and he's a school teacher. He's got no prior psychiatric history. He's got no history of any sexually deviant behavior. But Michael begins to change. And in this 3 or 4 minute video clip, you're going to hear about how Michael changed and what he began to do that he'd never done before. You'll hear from Michael, you'll hear from his wife, and you'll hear from his prepubescent stepdaughter. Then I'm going to continue the story to tell you how it ends up.
I didn't see any more, didn't hear of any more, had no suspicions of any until February 14, which is Valentine's Day of 2000. And I went to put a card, a Valentine's Day card, in his, the carrier that he took to work with him every day. And in there I saw that there was pornography. And I was horrified and so scared, because you can't take porn to school. You just can't do that. You risk everything.
Michael was starting to act out of character in other, more frightening ways.
seemed as though he was just always on edge, always angry. You know, he was taking pills every day because he was having these massive headaches. I mean, can remember this horrible argument we had on Thanksgiving Day where he grabbed my hair and actually pulled out, you know, some of my hair. And then it was at that point I called a counselor and said, you know, we need some help.
In the months which followed, the stepfather, husband, and high school teacher began to lead a double life.
A ball rolling downhill. It just gained speed. Pornography and strip clubs accelerated and expanded to massage parlors. But all of this is a desire towards grown women.
And then in May, I found a magazine called Barely Legal, which showed young girls who supposedly are legal, but frankly look like they're 13, 14 years old. And I was absolutely furious. I took Christina, she and I went to my mother's to stay with her for a couple of weeks while I thought about what to do. Just sort of like this kind of look of, what?
Anne's daughter Christina was 12 years old when she too started to notice changes in Michael's behavior.
Like, I've always been really, really close to my parents. They would lay down with me at night before I would go to sleep and maybe like sing me a lullaby or something like that. And it went on until I was way old. I remember like he would lay down with me and then that's when it started. It would always happen at night.
My wife started a nighttime class 2 days a week. She didn't get home until 10 o'clock at night. But when my stepdaughter laid down with me in her pajamas, I began to, not always, but sometimes, be a little more intimate with her than I should. And somewhere deep, deep, deep in the back of my head, there was a little voice saying, you shouldn't do this. But there was a much larger voice saying, what the heck, why not?
So Michael was found guilty of child molestation, and he had either to go to prison or he could go into treatment. And of course, Michael chose treatment. But in the treatment program, Michael began to make sexual propositions to the females in the program. So he was thrown out of the program and he had to go to jail for pedophilia. The night before he was due to go to prison, he developed a terrible headache and felt suicidal. He went to ER and he was admitted to the psychiatric wing under the diagnosis of pedophile. But even there, he began to sexually proposition the females in the psychiatric wing. And then on one occasion, he wet his trousers and showed no embarrassment, no shame, no remorse whatsoever for it. And an astute neurologist had Michael brain scanned. And what they found is there was a tumor growing from the base of the orbitofrontal cortex. Remember that orbitofrontal cortex above your eye orbit here? It was compressing the prefrontal cortex. The neurosurgeons resected the tumor, and Michael was completely different. He felt now very remorseful for everything that had happened. The pedophilic urges disappeared. He went back to the treatment program to complete treatment, and he was released to go back and live with his daughter and his wife. And it's a fascinating change, going from normality to the brain tumor affecting the prefrontal cortex, to pedophilic urges, to taking out the brain tumor, the treatment, swinging all the way back to normality. It's as close as we get to causality. And it should have been happily ever after. And for 6 months, it was. But then, the headaches came back. And his wife found child pornography on his computer. This time, she divorced him. She was never going to live with him again. She couldn't risk it for Christina. The neurosurgeons brain scanned Michael again, and they found the tumor had grown back. So they took out the tumor for a second time, and for 6 years, Michael has been totally normal. Raises a sort of issue about responsibility. So, for example, if you saw that data and you're on the jury in a court, would you find Michael responsible for his pedophilia, given knowing now what you know about the brain tumor and his change in behavior after the brain tumor? I know you're not legal experts, but you could be on a jury. Could you put up your hand if you would find Michael not responsible, that Michael is not responsible for his behavior? Just make an automatic gut reaction, yes or no. Hands up if you would not find Michael responsible. Okay, hands down. Hands up if you would find Michael responsible. Thank you. Hands down. It's about 60-40, 60% finding Michael not responsible. 40% of you would find Michael responsible. Judges would find Michael responsible. They would find him responsible because he has what we call rational capacity. Now, that means two things. First of all, do you know what you were doing? Secondly, do you know that what you were doing was wrong? And frankly, Michael did. Remember at the very end of the video, Michael said, deep, deep in the back of my head, I had a little voice saying, shouldn't do this. But the much bigger voice in the front saying, what the heck, why not? Michael knew what he was doing, he knew that it was wrong. Even Michael says, I did it, I'm the one to blame. But is that just to blame Michael, given what we know about the brain dysfunction beyond his control that put him in that direction? And even Michael says, well, you know, if somebody else did this but without a brain tumor, I think that's a different story. To me, I begin to wonder whether emotional capacity, the sense, the feeling of what is right and wrong, should be part of the judicial process by which we ultimately decide responsibility. That it's not just cognition and knowing, it's also feeling. It's also feeling. I've come to the end of my time, and I'm very interested in your thoughts and perspectives about where this knowledge may or may not take us, for better or for worse. I've been talking about these early risk factors beyond control, raising the odds of some kids becoming offenders, potentially because it impairs brain regions which are implicated in antisocial and violent behavior. Should we do more to screen and intervene early on and better the brains of kids who are prone for future violence? Should we use imaging and biology to better predict future crime and violence? And in terms of punishment, does this understanding, should that result in us being more merciful to these offenders, no matter how shocking their actions may be? So now we've come to the time for questions. As Tom said, if you do have a question, just come up to the microphone here. And I think, as Tom said, and I want to reiterate, students first. And a good reason for that is students are the next generation of scientists who are going to get the answers to some of these thorny and difficult questions. I'm not going to live long enough to find out the answers, but they will. And come on, don't be shy. I'm not like Hannibal Lecter, you know. I'm not going to eat you up.
Okay.
Not your liver, at least.
I just have a question.
So this is Anna. Anna!
Yeah.
Mamma mia! That's my mother's name.
Really? My question is kind of about...
Yeah, mouth.
Okay.
Just go close to the mic.
Okay. So my question's kind of like about the prediction portion that you talked about, and I'm just curious if, like by predicting, if you predict that someone with, like, say, the smaller size of their amygdala, if they are told, like, you have this and you may be predisposed for this, does that then have an impact? Because they're worried that that would then impact that subconsciously they're going to fall into that stereotype just by being told that they do have that predisposition?
Yeah, it's the idea is, could it be a self-fulfilling prophecy? If we find people who are at risk for future offending, by giving that information, could that move them into violence, even if we did nothing else? Having that belief that, yes, they are at risk for future violence. Well, I think it depends what we do with them and what help we can offer them. And I think there are things that we can do to alter amygdala functioning. I mean, we can go into this a little bit more if there's other questions on intervention. But I think it depends on what we do. And if we offer help and treatment that can make a difference, then it need not be a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because the alternative is you turn a blind eye to knowing that this individual is more likely to be violent. And you can take the moral high ground and say, do nothing. But then we have blood on our hands. The blood of the innocent victims in the future, you know, blood that need not have been shed. So, you know, we have to think of the risks, but we also have to think of the benefits and the balance between risks and benefits. That's an excellent question, Anna. Thank you. And, okay, so here we have, Lourdes.
Yep, Lourdes.
Oh, that's a lovely name.
Thank you. So so in your slide about the fetal alcohol syndrome, you did, there was this stat about like 50% of males and 33% of females were arrested after the age of 12. So I was wondering like why there was a difference between males and females, and also in the terms of the crimes that were committed, was there a difference between those as well?
Yeah, the difference between males and females is just the fact that males are more likely to become juvenile delinquents, more likely to commit crime. In fact, the figure in the 30% or so for the females is surprisingly high. It's really surprisingly high. So although it's lower than for males, remember that in a control group, way more males than females are going to become juvenile delinquents.
And in the terms of crimes, then would the males be more violent than the females when they did commit the crimes?
There would be more violence amongst males because, whereas for females, it tends to be more property offending. Not exclusively. There was a mix of offending in the females, but you're exactly right. You're a budding criminologist. You know that females, if they commit crime, they're less likely to commit violent crime. Thank you for your question. Alina,
yes.
Again.
My question is, since there's a difference in the amygdala structure and the frontal cortex usually with people with psychopathic tendencies, do you think there should be required prenatal screenings, and for those who are high-risk children, such as like fetal alcohol syndrome or drug addiction, and with these abnormalities, should forced termination of the pregnancy become a thing if they're at a high risk, or do you think...
Whoa, you are getting ethical here, isn't it? About forced termination of a pregnancy because the individual is going to be more at risk. We already know now that there is a marker before birth which will show if an individual is 9 times more likely to commit murder. It's having the Y chromosome. So, you know, I'm a guy, I don't think we should abort all men in society. You know, that's going to be the end of society, unfortunately, unless you bank our sperm early on. You women are going to be, you know, wishing you'd never taken that path. So I've got a vested interest in saying, no, we shouldn't abort fetuses, you know, because of genetic or biological markers. So at that level, we shouldn't. But the earlier part of your question was talking about screening. And I find this a difficult question. Like, okay, imagine you're a mum and you have little Johnny, and he's 11 years old, and I come to you and say, you know what? Little Johnny's rotten. He's a bad egg, he's bad, and we've done psychological tests, social, biological, genetic. All the boxes are checked. Every single box is checked. And he's already beginning to show some of the signs. That's the bad news. The good news is that we've got a new intervention program where he'll be taken from you for 2 years. But we've got new interventions that can change the brain and rewire him, epigenetics, and actually taking him away from you is a good thing because you're part of the reason he's bad, because you're not such a good mom yourself. Now there's a 60% chance, let's say, that the treatment will work. and that we can return little Johnny from you and he's no longer rotten. And maybe there's a 60% chance that we are wrong in terms of our prediction. The question, Elena, is what would you do with those odds? If I gave you the odds as a mum, what would you do with your little Johnny? So I'm wanting to fire the question back for you about screening and intervening, because I think it comes down to individuals in society like you. What would you do?
I think personally, as a mom, you would want to predict the best for your child. So personally, I would want to have the best odds for them. But if it's not your own kid, it's harder, you know, not to sound horrible, but...
It's tough if it's our own kid, but it's an individual choice. And maybe that's a good thing, individual choice. The problem becomes, you know, Elena is one of the reasons why little Johnny is rotten. And it's because she's a bad mum. And if she's a bad mum, she's got bad decision-making herself. So maybe a future would come where we don't leave it to Elena to make the decision, because she's no good at that. We make the decision. The government and institutions make the decision instead of asking the parent. That could be what could occur in the future. And you're saying, were you agreeing that would be a terrible thing to occur? Terrible thing to occur. What are they trying to do now? Right, okay, so we do get into reproduction and the rights of women in society. And by the way, I just want to add, I don't want to paint what I said earlier about the early health risk as blaming women for crime and violence in society. It's only that women give birth, not men. So, you know, I want to be very cautious and careful about that. And it's men who create the mayhem in society. But thank you for your question, Elena. I'm not sure I did such a good job in answering it, but that's as good as it gets, I'm afraid. We can talk later about it too. Yeah, so now we're coming to Rachel.
Hi, so you had mentioned seafood, and I was just wondering...
Oh yeah, just a bit closer, right up close.
I was just wondering if you had additional theories for prevention.
Additional theories for prevention, yes. So one of them, I mean, remember we've talked about the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. There's a certain technique that upregulates activity in those brain regions. Have you heard of mindfulness training? No, it's a form of meditation where you close your eyes and you think about what's going on inside you. It's also got a bit of a philosophy about accepting yourself, controlling and getting a sense of the emotions and feelings in your body, what you feel. It's getting your mind in touch with your feelings. Now, the amygdala is important in that, and randomized controlled trials have shown that this meditation technique, after 8 weeks, increases the activity in the prefrontal cortex, the very part of the brain that we find to be functioning more poorly. And you know, what's so heinous about getting people to do mindfulness training? That's not, you know, that's not a frontal lobectomy. It's quite the opposite. Now, we're not doing that at the moment, but there's some data suggestive that this could help a little bit. Incidentally, you know the omega-3, what I didn't mention is that there's been 2 randomized controlled trials so far giving fish oil to felons, fish for felons. Randomized controlled trials, one study in England showing that omega-3, this nutritional enhancement, reduced serious offending in the prison by 34%. The Ministry of Justice in the Netherlands heard that and said, well, that sounds fishy. You know, omega-3 reducing crime, we don't believe it. They commissioned their own randomized controlled trial. You'll never guess what, they found exactly the same effect. And actually, here's a broader question. How many randomized controlled trials do you need before you do anything? For the Ministry of Justice in the Netherlands, only 1, because they are now changing the diets of offenders within prison. Very lastly and quickly, another technique we are piloting right now, so just piloting, we don't know if it works, sounds scary, it's called transcranial direct current stimulation. We put electrodes on the forehead, we pass an electrical current through it, because that upregulates prefrontal functioning. And we're looking to see, can that reduce impulsive behavior? Can it enhance moral decision-making? And can it reduce aggressivity. So that's just another one as a bit of a throwaway, but that's a long way down the road. Thank you again for your question. And we have Caitlin.
So you said that some early risk factors can be like fetal alcohol syndrome and stuff. Is some of that maybe tied into how the parent then brings up the child, since they made maybe bad decisions while having the child in the womb? And so if we brought that child out of that environment, could that maybe reduce their risk factors of later becoming a violent criminal?
I would like to think that that's true. And I think it is true in part, that the environment determines a lot. So that even though you have the early prenatal risk factors for becoming a criminal offender, with all the love in the world, it can change things. There are some case studies. I mean, there was one case study on 60 Minutes that I was involved in, which showed it's not true in all cases. It's a case of a man whose father was a murderer. He was adopted into a lovely, wonderful home with all the best things in life, all the love that a little kid could ask for. But right from the get-go, he was shoplifting, stealing, burglarizing home, even at 10, burglarizing somebody's home. And he grew up to become a killer, just like the biological father he'd never met before. Now, it's not that biology is destiny. It's clearly not. We can change these biological risk factors for crime and violence. Could we do it with love? I think the Beatles were right. All you need is love. That I think love can do such a lot for young kids. And frankly, that's what we need more of in society. It can make an enormous difference. So yes, absolutely, the environment can make a big difference. And we go back, I think, to parenting. And the love that a parent gives to their child is something that's enormously special and has long-lasting effects, of course, throughout the years. Thank you, Caitlin. Celine. Yeah. Celine Provost. Oh, you may be a provost when you grow up.
Yeah.
Wow, what a name.
That'd be kind of cool.
Celine.
So I was just wondering, so are mental disorders like schizophrenia, are they a factor in future crime?
Schizophrenia, it's a major mental illness. Good question, Celine. Is it involved in future crime? Unfortunately, yes. There have now been many large-scale studies documenting, again, beyond reasonable doubt, that sadly, if you have this major mental illness, you are more likely to commit crime, to commit violence and murder. The odds ratios are pretty bad. If you're male and schizophrenic, you are 4 times likely to murder someone. If you're female and schizophrenic, you are 22 times more likely to murder than if you're a female without schizophrenia, controlling for these background factors. For decades, psychiatrists understandably have not wanted that knowledge to eke out, because it's awful enough having the label of schizophrenia without having the awful label of violent prone. But we need to recognize that schizophrenics are more at risk for aggression in order to tailor interventions to help not just with the hallucinations and delusions, but also with the lack of control over their emotional feelings. I hope perhaps you in your future may be part of the venture that can do more to reduce the burden of mental illness in society with particular attention to future violence. Thank you, Celine. Megan, how do you do?
Oh, good, how are you?
And you don't want to know my whole life. How do I do? How am I doing? Okay, I suppose.
How's the weather?
Rain. I always wanted to be a weather forecaster, you know, but in my lectures I do tell the weather every morning in class.
Oh.
So, you know, it's maybe one of my other hobbies, weather forecasting. Okay, let's get back to violence.
Your presentation is amazing. I think it's a good way to take some of the...
She's a plant in the audience. Sell books.
Taking the social issue out and just focusing on this is interesting, but I was wondering if you could comment on culture. And the fact that male aggression is valued in our culture and many Western cultures, and the idea that psychopath behavior and their inability to empathize with emotion actually puts them in higher positions in businesses and management because they have the skills to make harder decisions.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could comment on how that actually plays into all of the biological.
It's an excellent point, Megan, and I agree with your perspective. So the perspective here is, if we could wave our magic wand and take away lack of fear and lack of conscience and lack of remorse, are we taking away something good in society? So to put it in a perverse way, during peacetime, we lock up psychopaths and put them in prison. Times of war, we need them on the front line to shoot, point that gun, and without hesitation, pull that trigger and feel not 1 ounce of remorse about what they're doing. We want them to be good fighters, good soldiers, and even in business or in politics, aren't there some features of the psychopathic personality that come to play? Psychopaths con and manipulate. Well, a good politician needs to persuade, don't they? A good politician needs to make some pretty cold-blooded decisions during their political careers. You begin to wonder, if you have a psychopathic individual, can we make use of their talents and abilities, their ability to con and manipulate and tell white lies and without feeling bad about things? Like, can we take psychopaths and train them to be good second-hand car salesmen, for example? But I take your point. If we could change all of this, would we lose something? It's a very poignant question. And I think the answer could be there might well be a loss. But I would still argue the benefits of stopping psychopathic personalities in society outweigh the losses.
Okay, so just like with male
Well, I'm
aggression.
not getting away from this, am I?
Sorry. No, just to follow up, like men have to act a certain way that usually involves aggression and violence to be seen as manly in a culture.
Socialization, absolutely.
So do you think we should take that aspect away?
You mean like with violent TV and giving little boys guns and instead of dolls?
I mean, just on anything like the books little girls read where the guy is always willing to fight on their behalf and stuff. That kind of idea that males have to act in a way that could eventually lead to murder and other violent crimes.
If it can stop crime and if it can stop violence and stop homicide, I think we should do everything we can. The question is, would that make a difference? And can we override what is very inherent in males in terms of their biology, their drives? Would it make a difference? I would say, as an individual, if it makes a difference, and if, again, the benefits outweigh the risks, I think we should be doing it. But what do you think?
I think if the benefits outweigh the risks, I think that it's harmful to men and women, that men are held to this standard of aggression, and women are held to the standard of docility. And like you said, there's a difference between the way men and women are going to commit crimes despite the biological evidence. And I think that even removing social aspects from this, you still can't get away from the fact that to be accepted in a culture like ours, you have to act a certain way.
It's intriguing to think of, could we make males less male and more female-like in order to reduce violence? Taking the biological model, we think that would work. But would that be the right thing to do in society? Would that be not right for men in general in society?
Oh, thank you.
I'm getting my exercise tonight. Hey, you don't have a name tag. Who the heck are you? Mariah. Go on, Mariah.
I have a question about the brain's plasticity.
Yep.
So you mentioned changing the brain to change the behavior. I'm just wondering if there is any research or if there would be a better effect of changing behavior to change the brain.
Yeah, a really good question. Changing behavior to change the brain. In a way, yes, because the environment changes the brain. Like tonight, your brain has been changed permanently. No electrodes are involved here, but new synaptic connections are formed in your brain. New pathways have been laid out by our interchange tonight. So even without behavior, just listening and communicating, that can change the brain. Behavior, of course, can also change the brain in just the same way. The classic study, which you may be familiar with, is taxi drivers in London, that with their training in finding their way around the twisty roads in London, they have an enlargement in the hippocampus. And we believe it's the experience of navigating around London and the visuospatial abilities that are required that enhances the actual size and volume of the hippocampus. So absolutely, behaviors can change the brain. What's in your mind on that concept? Because it's certainly true.
I'm just wondering if maybe it's more ethical to try to maybe classical condition rather than give medication to individuals to change their behavior.
We haven't talked about this. So you're raising a good question. The whole issue of medication and ethics. I don't know what you think, but what the science shows from more than 45 randomized controlled trials is that medications do work in reducing aggressive behavior in children. Now, it sounds like, well, we would never want to do that, would we? All depends. If you're a parent and, you know, your little Andrew is running riot and there's nothing you can do about it, maybe you want a quick fix, you know, because you're stretched as a mum and caregiver, and maybe you'd like the medication to solve the problem quickly. We do know that medications do work, and they are given to children with aggressive behavior, whether we like it or not. The question is, do we have any other interventions that don't require direct medical intervention like that? And from the ethical side, that's why I have turned to nutrition, which is like natural medications, isn't it? But anyway, thank you for your very good questions. And one more. Last but by no means least, Kelsey.
Yeah. Hi. My question was a little bit of a follow-up from this last one. And you had mentioned mindfulness training earlier and electrode stimulation to maybe affect some of the function in parts of the brain. Do you think that one or the other would be more effective?
We just don't know.
Okay.
We just don't know. We certainly don't know yet whether this transcranial direct current stimulation can have an effect. It's just one of those things for the future, perhaps. Even with nutrition, frankly, I do think we need more randomized controlled trials.
Yeah.
You know, because, you know, quite recently we've been learning that 60% of the findings published in psychology do not replicate. You know, papers published in scientific journals, they don't replicate. 2/3 of them are not replicating. So I think we have to be very careful where we go. And the law goes very cautiously and carefully, and perhaps we should, in terms of applying science to society, we have to be careful.
I mean, do you think it would be the benefits from maybe encouraging more mindfulness training from a young age through adulthood? Is that
Might it help?
Yeah.
Sure, it might help. We just don't know really at the moment. Nobody's done longitudinal studies on that. But why I think it's worth considering is how much harm can come from doing, 10 minutes of mindfulness every day. How much harm can come from taking a fruit juice drink every day containing omega-3? The risks are minimal. The benefits could be sky high, in theory. But we need good science. We need good science before recommendations can be made. And frankly, I think it's still the early days, which is why, having the students here, they're going to be the next generation. They're the ones who are going to be providing, hopefully, the science that will help answer these difficult and tricky scientific and ethical questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kelsey. Thank you very much.
Thank you for a wonderful talk, and thank you all for coming. Now we are going to adjourn to the lobby, and perhaps this conversation can continue on a bilateral basis. Next talk is in February.